Hello, Booktube. Well, as I mentioned, it's a bleak and barren Sunday here at Hyde Cottage, which is my term for a day in which I get no books in the mail. And I decided to do two tags back to back because it's so unbelievably cold. And the second one is this one, the No Disclaimer book tab, another original tag by Michael at Catalyst Reads. I'll try to remember to leave the link down to him on both these videos. And it's just a bunch of questions. We go right through them. Some of them are quite interesting. Question number one is, which trope annoys you the most in books? I'm not going to rant here. I'm assuming here that trope in this instance means exactly what it does every other time it's ever mentioned on Booktube, which is cliches. I'm going to assume that what is being talked about here is what cliches annoy you the most in books. And I'm just going to pass on to my answer from there rather than get that stuck in my craw and go on a rant. And I actually have one in mind. There are all sorts of course, popular literature is built on cliches. And one that bothers me is the helpless protagonist, where not hapless and not maybe temporarily clueless, but completely helpless. Why do I want to read a story about such a person? And how on earth are you expecting, as we're talking fiction here, how on earth are you expecting me to believe that a helpless protagonist could ever do anything? And the whole point of a protagonist is that they do something. And, of course, the example I have in mind is the girl on the train, where I know a lot of people love the book, and most of it's, in my experience anyway, most of the people who profess their love of the book the loudest don't appear to have read it. But its protagonist is a helpless blackout alcoholic. There are scenes that are, we get scene after scene after scene where she doesn't know where she is. She has no physical sensation in her body, no idea how she got there, only dimly aware of people yelling at her in the same room to put down the knife, to clean up the blood. Someone who has a drinking problem that bad doesn't do any amateur sleuthing. They don't do anything except lose their job. I understand if you're a somewhat low wattage popular writer and you want to gin up sympathy for your character, you will make them helpless. You load them on with disadvantages, hoping to enlist the sympathy of your readers. But there's a point past which that makes no sense. There are kinds of doing that make no sense, and I see more and more of it in books, and it just drives me crazy. If you have a protagonist who's a falling down drunk, bitter, violent, blackout alcoholic, that is your story. That has to be your story, or you're writing science fiction. If you have a character who is a bitter, falling down drunk alcoholic who also has an adventure in which they do something, it's ridiculous. You might as well have them sprout wings and fly to the moon. So that's a cliche that drives me nuts. Question number two. Which writer or writers do you feel are overrated? There's quite a few, of course. I'm in the book reviewing profession, so I'm intimately familiar with the bubble reputation, with the Amelia Nettleships of my day. The ones that came to mind right off the top of my head for this question are the Dude Bro writers. There's a small group of writers. They don't know each other. They're not trying to create a project, but they are dopamine writers. They write books that are designed to affect you like a handheld video game. They don't have any literary texture. They don't have any resonance. They don't have especially any three-dimensional characters. The literature that they write is designed to be a video game. It's designed to hit the parts of your brain that are affected in the same way by a video game. I always want to tell people who read Dan Ilewski or Chuck Palahniuk or Cormac McCarthy, I always want to tell people who love these authors, the part of your brain that's lighting up when you love them is like all the way across your head from the part of your brain that should light up when you read, that lights up when you're reading actual prose that's doing what prose should do, instead of giving you hits. I've gone 3 pages and I don't have a hit, and I think it's funny to watch. I've been watching these authors and authors like them for a long time, and I watched the whole generation of Dude Bro writers before them, and it's always funny because it's not strictly adherent to demographics. it's more a question of what you have trained yourself to want out of books, regardless of your demographic. I have introduced 18 and 19-year-old men, by common consensus in the polling literature, the brick dumbest demographic of them all when it comes to reading. I've introduced, I don't know how many, 18, 19, 20-year-old men to Chuck Palahniuk, who have said, or Cormac McCarthy, and they've said, okay, I don't get this at all. This seems really bad. And then I introduce them to something with texture. Whatever it is that you want it to be, whether it's science fiction, fantasy, or historical fiction, or contemporary fiction, I introduce them something that has texture to it. And they immediately say, oh yeah, this is completely, yeah, this I really like. So it isn't just demographic, it isn't just age, or whether or not you're a dude bro yourself. It's something else. It's something in the way that you're taught to appreciate literature. And I'm hoping that it's curable. But anyway, those authors, I think, are drastically overrated, especially since, because of their book-selling popularity, because they move units, a lot of book review organs start to take the product of what they write seriously as what it isn't. They look at this product and they talk about it like it's this product. That's just very frustrating. Anyway, question number 3. What are your least favorite books you've read since joining Booktube? I think the sort of implication here is because of joining Booktube. I could be reading that wrong, but I haven't, as far as I know, I haven't read any books because of Booktube. But God, we're closing in on 2 years that I've been on Booktube, and in those 2 years, oh my God, I have lost count of how many horrible books I have. I don't know what a least favorite would be from all of those. I read a ton of books that I absolutely hate, and not just, I read a huge amount of indie books for review at Kirkus Reviews, but it's not just that. I also read a ton of other books that just if I had to if I had to pick a category that routinely gets on the least favorite list, it would probably be young Earth creationist texts, which are still published. HarperCollins, Random House, they still publish. Major publishing houses who aren't explicitly religious houses still publish this crap on a regular basis, where I don't even know, some minuscule microscopic detail of the genetic code is not understood with complete back-to-forward certainty by geneticists, and therefore the Judeo-Christian God made the Earth 6,000 years ago, complete with dinosaurs. Stuff like that just, where you get somebody, they have some sort of store-bought PhD after their name, and they write this book, and it gets to me. I don't go looking for these things, but when they get to me, oh God, they usually are on the least favorite, I think, because you don't even know where to start. You know for a fact that a 30-something adult doesn't actually believe this. So you immediately have to wonder, okay, well, you don't actually believe what you're saying, and yet you went through a year and a half of writing this book and vetting it, flogging it all around, going through production meetings with it, going through edits with it. Now you're doing press for it. So you had to have a reason. And we can remove from the table completely that the reason was that you actually believe that Noah put brontosauruses on the ark. You don't, of course, believe that. So what is your motivation? What motivation is left if you remove that? And there's only one, and it's horrifying, evil, disgusting, and that's indoctrination. It's the only possible motive left. If you don't believe what you're writing, the only possible motive left is that you want other people to believe what you're writing. See? It's least favoriting right in front of you. Let's just move on before I have myself an episode. Question number 4. A terrible ending that ruined an otherwise quality book. Now, I know those of you who have been watching my 8,000 videos from the beginning, this is going to sound like a broken record, but it will always be my go-to example, and that is Thomas Harris's novel Hannibal, which is really, really good. It's a tremendous work of popular police procedural thriller. Until the last 30 pages, when Harris, because he was on deadline or got bored or whatever, just punts the whole thing. It's unbelievable what he does. I don't want to spoil the book's ending for any of you who might read it, especially since I wholeheartedly encourage you to read the 350 pages at the beginning, not the 50 pages at the end. The 50 pages at the end are a total betrayal of everything that had gone before it in the book and all of his other books. I'm still stunned by what I read. I couldn't believe it at first. In fact, when I read it, I emailed the publicist immediately and said, "Can you find out what's going on here? This has to be a trick of some kind, but it looks like a finished copy to me." Anyway, it'll be Hannibal. Question number 5: which fictional character do you wish weren't killed off? My first instinct here was to say none, because that's not how fiction works. It's not my clique in high school. I don't know these people in the cafeteria. I don't have to pass them in the hallway and like, oh my God, he's so cute. And like, oh my God, she's such a mean girl. I don't wish that a character weren't killed off is to wish that an author had written a different book. And who would do that? But if I play along with the pretext of the question just a bit, one idea that always comes to mind is Duke Leto from Frank Herbert's Dune. We're told right at the beginning of Dune, it's practically the first thing that we learn in Dune is, for the father, nothing. We're told right from the beginning that no matter what else happens with the betrayal of House Atreides, Duke Leto, the head of that house, has to die. And I have read that book a million times. I've scoured the sequels. I have scoured the underlying rationale behind everything, and I don't see it. I honestly don't see it. I realize that Duke Leto has to die for purposes of Frank Herbert's. He needs to be gone. Absolutely, you can't. The book will be about him as long as he's in it. But in terms of the book itself, in terms of the plot, I don't see it. I don't see why he has to die, much less why it's made out to be some sort of prophetic certainty that there are many pieces that have to fall into place here, and that's one of them. I don't get it at all. But wishing that he weren't killed off, no, it just confuses me. That's all. I'm not wishing that Frank Herbert's novel Dune were any different than it is. Anyway, question number 6. What are some of your bookish pet peeves? Oh my God, Booktube, how long have you got? I jotted down a few here. Scholars who claim more about their books than they should, and when they know perfectly well. So you write a new book about President Eisenhower, and it's not just your publicity flacks at your publisher who say this. You say, it's the first fully comprehensive biography of Eisenhower in 30 years. When, to quote Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I'm standing right here. Anyone who has followed your subject matter is going to know that isn't true. And you know it too. And if you don't know that it isn't true, then you had no business writing a new book, because it means there's a gaping hole, at least one, in your bibliography. And speaking of bibliographies, that's another pet peeve, is scholars who omit their rivals from their bibliography. So you're writing a new book about Shakespeare's stagecraft, and you are a Shakespearean scholar, Poobah, and there's another Shakespearean scholar, Poobah, and you don't like him, and you've never liked him, and I go to your bibliography of what is supposed to be a definitive survey of some subject matter, or the Lord Chamberlain's Men or whatever, and he's not in there at all. None of his 10 books are in there. Well, then you might think that the wholesale omission of your noted rival is that the impression you're going to give on readers is that means you think that your rival's work is not trustworthy. But the exact opposite is going to happen. If I see that omission, I'm going to think your work isn't trustworthy. Because how do you ignore someone who can't be ignored just because you don't like them? And if that's true, what else are you ignoring? For stupid personal reasons. And the same thing, as long as we're on bibliographies and endnotes and whatnot, same thing is true for authors who cite themselves. It drives me nuts. Just drives me nuts. If you think that you have done groundbreaking work on the evolution of the naval forces of the Byzantine Empire, fine. Feel free to bore your dinner guests with that assertion as much as you like. But don't quote yourself in your endnotes. Don't quote your own conclusions. Right? Because if those conclusions are scholarly sound, then there'll be other scholars you can quote. And if they aren't sound, if your scholarly work is unsound, who's the last person who's going to know that? You. don't quote yourself. Don't leave the ego trip out of your endnotes. I don't want to see, in your bibliography, I don't want to see 10 books by you. Even if there's some sort of scholarly justification for it, have a little self-control, for Pete's sake. Leave yourself out of it. Leave the reader to understand that you've written other books on the subject. Instead of saying, well, my name's Lazenby, see, when it comes to this point about the 10th Legion, see Lazenby. What else have I got here? Also in terms of nonfiction, most of these have been nonfiction. Although I guess maybe this next one applies to fiction as well sometimes. And that is BuzzFeed clickbait mini chapters. I don't even know what you call them. So you have, David Starkey does it all the time, drives me nuts, where you have a chapter, chapter 4. But then there's this segment, and then there's a break, and maybe a little subtitle, and then another segment. And the segments are only 10, 6, 8 paragraphs long, and I want to know what the point is there. What are you doing there? Are you going after a TV audience? Are you thinking about commercial breaks? It's extremely disjointed, and I prefer that people didn't do that. Then the last two pet peeves for now, I could do a whole video on bookish pet peeves, but would be boring titles. If you have an idiom or a cliche as your title, don't. Come up with something else. Come up with something that adds to originality. As night closes in, better late than never, too close for comfort. Don't do that. Just don't do it. And of course, horrible covers, like all critics worth their salt. I mostly judge books by their covers. American cover designs, aside from romances, are just so abysmal, just so awful, that it almost looks like some sort of intentional joke. So those are some bookish pet peeves. We're going to move on, otherwise I would just keep talking. Let's see here. Question number 7. What are some underrated books? I wrote down a few here. One is a debut that I really wished had taken off when it came out last year. The Half-Drowned King by Linnea Hartsuyker. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. But the book was incredibly good. It's a Viking novel, and I really wanted it to be sort of more widespread than it was. I wholeheartedly recommend it. It's fantastic. But also the fiction of Suzanne Rindell. One of the books she did was 3 Martini Lunch, which is a novel about the grand old days of 20th century book publishing, the publishing world, the writing world of the early part of the 20th century. It was terrific. But all of her books, they're all sort of genteel historical novels, and they're all terrific. And also a writer that you almost certainly will not have heard about, and you really should find his books. Albert Bell is his name. He writes a series of murder mysteries set in ancient Rome, starring Pliny the Younger, whose biography and works I know backwards and forwards, because I wrote a novel about the Emperor Trajan, and you can't get away from Pliny the Younger if you're writing about Trajan. And the books are wonderful. They're rock solid. They're really entertainingly done. And I don't know the story with Albert Bell. I find it hard to believe that he has put a lot of work into flogging these things to a major mystery publisher. Maybe he does them mostly for his own entertainment. Certainly the books read that way. They read like he's having a ball writing them. But I can't imagine that maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe I'm underestimating how hard things are. But I can't imagine a big, high budget mystery publisher who wouldn't grab these things and do a nice reprint set of all of them, because I think there are 10. They're so good, though. If you like murder mysteries set in ancient Rome, then I heartily recommend finding Albert Bell. You'll never find his books in a used bookstore or in a new bookstore, but you could order one and see what you think. And then question number 8 is, what are your thoughts on censorship and banning books? I don't know what Michael was thinking about this one. He was thinking he's going to get some people to say, oh yeah, I love it. Now, I hate, of course, any shred of censorship or banning books, including the latest form of censoring books, which is designed to fly under a camouflage that prevents you from seeing that that's what it is, and that is sensitivity readers, who are not sensitivity readers. They are sensitivity or else readers. The ones that you will find online make a sort of offhand reference to how big their social media following is, and there's a reason for that. Because if you don't do what they say, they're going to pillory you, they're going to hashtag you, and they're going to start with your publisher to try and stop your book from getting printed. And that is censorship, and it's also, because it's sensitivity readership, it's also incredibly bigoted, and it drives me nuts that not enough people are seeing that. What we're talking about here is, I don't even know, a young Chicana woman putting herself forward $100 an hour as a sensitivity reader and saying to you, the author of some new YA novel, why don't I look at that and tell you if any of the usages that you have for your Latina characters are problematic. Now, first of all, if an author who's been working on this book for 3 years says, I don't have any Latina characters, then just say goodbye to your publishing career, because you have to have one. But if the author says, well, I worked on this for 2.5 years, all the time, I slaved on it, I put off friends and family in order to write this book. If I got anything wrong, then that's on me. But I don't need anybody else's help to do that. It's my book. Then they won't get a contract, or they'll be attacked in public for being insensitive. It's the whole point of sensitivity reader. When I wish that sensitivity readers would fly under their true colors and just say censor. Just say what you are. You're a book censor. The emperor, has the regime, whatever it is, has a certain code. The people who make sure that anything that's published adheres to that code are censors. So why not just use the word? And the bigoted part comes from the fact that you think you can speak for whatever demographic you are. So you're, I don't even know, a 45-year-old black man, you decide to put your services forward as a sensitivity reader. Well, you're obviously not a sensitivity reader for a 70-year-old Boston Irish Catholic white man. No, you're putting yourself forward as a sensitivity reader for your demographic, your sexuality, your ethnicity. And as I've said a couple of times on this channel before, take a step back and realize how insulting that is. How incredibly insulting that is. That is incredibly bigoted. If that same person who's advertising his services as a sensitivity reader for all 40-something black men in America, I'm going to read your book and I'm going to tell you what black men in America might find objectionable or will find objectionable. If that same person went to your in-laws for dinner, and in the course of dinner, someone looked at them across the table and said, hey, you're black, what do black people think about this? Can you imagine what their reaction would be? It's the exact same thing. But turned around and framed in that way, their reaction would be incandescent fury, and rightfully so. but all of a sudden, the latest fad in the publishing world, especially fiction, is, well, we're going to get you an editor, but we're going to also get you a sensitivity reader, or maybe more than one. The number of sensitivity rules will depend not on your manuscript, because no one's even bothered to look at that yet. No, it'll depend on you. It'll depend on you. Are you white? Are you male? Are you cisgender? Are you from money? Are you from the upper middle class? If all of those things are true, well, hell, you might need a whole army of sensitivity readers. And if we're going to do that and say that that's okay, of course it's not. That's absolutely ridiculous. A complete abrogation of the relationship between the writer and the reader, and the writer and the editor. But if we're going to say that's true, why stop there? How many books have I read just in the last year that had crappy action scenes, horrible wooden dialogue, people talking like no one talks in real life, or, as I've mentioned on this channel many times before, a completely botched ending where the plot is just ticking along and complicating and exfoliating, and then it just stops, or one thread is tied in the silliest, most reductive way, and all the others are left hanging. Well, what if I'm a little snowflake and seeing those things in a book really bothers me, triggers me even? Do you need an action scene reader? What about a dialogue sensitivity reader? You need one of those? Or what about an affluence sensitivity reader? All of your characters seem to be wealthy. None of them seem to have any problem making ends meet. That really bothers me. Then what? What's left at the end of this line for the author to do? God, oh my God. I was hoping I would get through this without a rant. But in terms of what are your thoughts on censorship and banning books, I am against both. I am against both. I am against fascism in all of its forms. And fascism is, I don't want you to do X, and I'm prepared to use force to stop you. When X is something that isn't hurting anyone, it's not a crime, it's not murder, it's not beating anyone, it's an expression of yourself. I don't want you to express yourself in X way. And if you do, I'm going to use force to stop you or to punish you. That's fascism. And I'm against it in any of its forms. If you are a writer who took 3.5 years to write a book, and at the end of that, and one of your goals was to be sensitive to your portrayal of your black character or your gay character, your bisexual character, and at the end of that 3.5 years you failed, pick another profession. Or bamboozle your editors long enough to get the book to print and have it pilloried by the critics and the press and their readers. Fine. Do either one of those things. But don't deliver a half-dead corpse onto the operating table and then say, you know, I still want my royalty, but fix this. Let's just move on. Oh, God. That's the end. Oh, thank God. So all that's left is for me to tag people in this hideously long video. And when Michael did this no disclaimer book tag, his original tag, he tagged like 40 people. He tagged, you know, tons and tons and tons of active members of what has been referred to as Booktube 2.0. So rather than retag all of those people or you know, hunt around for the few exceptions, I did something else. I went to the latest batch of Booktube newbies that Ben Sanders has been tweeting out and praising. And I'm going to tag all of them, and I'm going to leave their links down below because they're brand new. Some of them have less than 20 subscribers. They could probably they would probably appreciate the invitation. I don't know if they would after that last rant, but one way or another. So what have I got here? Justin at Ghost Reader, Ginny Readsley. I want to tag Symptoms of Oblivion. I want to tag Fen at Fenfordays. I want to tag Miss Hodder. Katie at Kate Wilson, and Alex at Where Alex Reads. And I'll leave the link to all of those down below. And if they're horrified at being tagged by someone after my anti-sensitivity reader rant, I should stress we're all about energetic disagreement, right? There isn't a tenable case that you can make in argument of the points that I was making. But if you want to try, it's a free country, go right ahead. I promise to be gentle. In the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up, thank God, because it's been a long video, and I will see you soon. Thank you, Booktube.